Welcome to our Community Advisory Group meeting for May. We have very much a CAG-centered agenda here in that the main topic for this evening was suggested by CAG members as a topic, and we'll work through our list. There's another item later on to talk about future meetings and future topics for this group, and we have collated a number of the suggestions from previous items and previous discussions where we've raised this question about future meeting topics for the CAG, so we'll try to develop that in some greater detail this evening. So once again, I'm Daniel Isofano, the moderator for the Community Advisory Group. We'll do a quick round of self-introductions and jump right into our program. Sam?
I'm Sam Chapman. I'm Manager of State and Community Relations for the lab.
Glenn Kubiak, Chief Operating Officer at the lab.
Paul Avisatos, Lab Director.
Wendy Cozen, Berkeley Planning Department.
Chris Adams, a community member.
Dean Metzger with Blue.
Paul Lick, Director of the UC Botanical Garden.
Polly Armstrong, CEO, Berkeley Chamber of Commerce.
Phil Price, lab employee and community member.
Emily Mortensen, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Planning at UC Berkeley.
Whitney Dotson, East Bay Regional Parks, and also community member.
Carol Schemmerling, the Urban Creeks Council and Strawberry Creek Leadership Council.
Lynn Oleknowitz, Enigma Institute and community member.
Elizabeth Stage, Lawrence Hall of Science.
Allegra Kim, Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment.
I'm Rich Sextro. I'm a lab retiree and also a community member.
Okay, very good. Thank you all for coming this evening. We will move right into our first major item, and that is an update on the Richmond campus planning efforts. Sam, do you want to provide that to us? And we may have a few other additions to the agenda as we go along. Carol has an item, and we'll make sure we work that in. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is, I don't think of this as a major update, but it's your regular update on what's happening with the Richmond Bay campus. So we are still in the long-range development planning process and the environmental review process. We are tentatively now scheduling, hoping to schedule a public meeting for the long-range development plan in the month of June, somewhere in the middle of June. We don't have a date yet, but that will be scheduled. It will be scheduled in Richmond, and we will invite the public to come again and to comment on the long-range development plan. That plan will be released shortly after that, sometime in the following period of weeks, and then we will be doing the California Environmental Quality Act public process. As you may recall, we started that with the notice of preparation in January, and we had a public meeting for comments on the scope of the environmental process. We expect to release the environmental documents in the period of late July through August, and we will schedule a public meeting on the draft environmental impact report during that period, sometime late July into August, and there will be a review period for public comments and also comments at the public meeting. So this is all pointed toward going to the Board of Regents. It's looking now like we'll be going to the Board of Regents for approval, assuming we proceed with each of those processes without any complications or delays early next year in January or March, it's likely. So that's the status of where we are. You should all be receiving notices when we schedule meetings. If you're not, let me know and we'll make sure you're on the list. But the next meetings again will probably be in June for the LRDP, and then in late July to August for the draft environmental impact report for the Richmond Bay campus.
Okay, any questions, comments on the Richmond? Let's see, Chris and then Carol.
With all the news about the problems with the federal budget Is there going to be any money to implement anything that the plan might propose to us?
We're not immune to sequestration and the federal budget issues, so we are partnered with UC Berkeley, and we are jointly exploring various financing options for the project. We did not receive funding for the DOE building, the DOE finance building that we had hoped to receive funding for, but there were no new starts within the DOE budget, so it was a nationwide issue that we were caught up in. But we plan to continue to proceed with the project. We have a strong partner with UC Berkeley, and we will be continuing to explore financing options as we proceed with the long-range development plan and the environmental review process.
Okay, very good. Carol?
Well, that was the question I was going to ask as well, because I heard that the DOE was not going to be providing funding for the whole project. So it sounds like that was not quite the case.
Well, there is not funding in the budget that the president submitted to Congress, and that's the president's budget, because there were no new starts within the Department of Energy. It doesn't mean that funding couldn't come in some other way, or Congress could insert funding for it. There are various ways that it could still appear, and if it's not in this budget, it could be in a future budget. So that's just unknown at this point, but it hasn't. We are still proceeding full speed ahead with the planning and the environmental review process, which is the part of the process that we're actively engaged in right now with the public.
Very good. Let's see, Rich?
What's the time horizon for what's the long range development plan? What's the time horizon for that?
The current schedule called for completing the environmental review process in the LRDP this year, and now that's going into next year. Occupancy, if everything went, site preparation would follow that, construction would follow that. If everything went according to plan, occupancy was planned for 2018 or perhaps 2019. So it's always been a number of years into the future.
But the LRDP covers the sort of the full build out, not just the initial build out.
The LRDP is it's literally a long range development plan, so it covers a period of 40 years. And the eventual, if the project were to proceed to complete development, the LRDP anticipates all of that. That's why the square footage is 5.4 million square feet and a potential population of 10,000. But that is all off into the future. The first phase is a much smaller part of the project, and we're focused on the first phase right now.
Okay, very good. Let's have Jennifer Ridgway, Director of the Capital Projects, give us an update there on the goings-on. So, Jennifer, you can use the microphone Sam has, and then here is the clicker. All right.
All right. Good evening, everybody. How is everybody? So, I'm going to show you an update, and I find that if you just want to stop me as I go along, that works a lot better. So, we have a new picture. Remember Phyla a couple times back said, or maybe 6 months ago, said, let's take some pictures from outside the laboratory. We did that. Then the next couple times I came down here, we just showed inside the laboratory. So now I'm back to showing one or two from outside the laboratory. And the reason that I'm showing this photo is because we actually took this photo for another reason. Paul asked that we take various pictures from places outside the laboratory and put into there what we think our whole long-range plan of buildings will be. That we haven't done yet, but I did want to share the pictures because we already have them and I thought you'd like to see them. But I can show you right here where our CRT building is being built. Where's my pointer? Do you see that orange diagonal right there? That's a crane. And so remember the last time I was here, we passed around samples and we changed the color from bright white to gray. That's for that building that's going to be sitting, okay, where's my pointer? Right there. So from the downtown view, you can see, our ALS, you can see our Building 70, our 50 complex, and from this particular view, this is, about what you see. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. Oops.
Jennifer, the building isn't there yet, right?
Right, the building's not there yet.
How high will it be?
Let's get on to the next slides where that's going to be, okay? So this is the facility, the CRT facility that's going to go on that point, and here it is right here. This is a current view of construction, looking down. I told you for a year I was going to talk to you about we move dirt real well. Well, we've moved dirt, we've piled it up, we're reusing the dirt as we need it, and this is where we are right now in the foundation phase of all of this. Oh, so I didn't show that photo. We did have the artist rendering of the photo, but I didn't include it. That building, it's 1 story underground, well, not underground, but at a lowest level, and that's where the cooling is for the computer units. And then it's a total of 4 levels, but it's all built in various points. So I will come back to you with the facts on it. I have all those facts, but I just don't have them in my head or on this slide. The next buildings that we have are the Solar Energy Research Center and the General Purpose Lab. This one is basically, we're finishing the inside of this one. And on the Solar Energy Research, we showed the color sample of that. This is an 8,000 square foot footprint. And they are being built right in this area. So that's the latest photo of the General Purpose Lab. This is the building that Paul sees from the Botanical Garden. And this steel structure off to the right is the Solar Energy Research Facility. Now also, we're running a little bit of a photo contest as a morale builder in the facilities division, so I have some photos that the employees took on some of these buildings. That's one of them. So you can see that it is getting finished. That's the point that faces inside to the laboratory. Then the Cirque building, which is the one that I showed you, just very close there to the General Purpose Laboratory. This is the artist rendering. It's a little bit darker in color than what you see here. It's 8,000 square feet footprint. That's the employee's photograph that they took, not our lab photographer. Then we have a building that you don't see from the downtown views. That's our building 90, and outside in front of it we had these trailers, which we have removed. This is an older photograph that we need to update. But we're building a user test bed facility. And this is where no one is going to reside, but there's going to be research work performed in here. And you can see the steel structure that's being built. And then this is actually a foundation where a rotating unit will be, and they'll be able to, it rotates 270 degrees, they'll be able to put different skins, different window treatments, roof treatments to see the effects of energy use. And that's what this whole user test bed facility is going to be used for. It's out in front of building 90. And then we have our truck trips, and again, these are always projections, and we're staying within the amount that we are supposed to stay in. In the summertime, things do ramp up a bit because of the good weather. And that's the end.
Sorry to interrupt you as you were going, but I do have a question. Could you go back to one of those maps?
Oops.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, the CRT building, I think I pointed this out before, that the area that's disturbed on the ground that I think they're building, like the giant retaining wall and so on, seems to extend much further up towards the top than that grayed out area. And another map that we showed seemed to also show that we saw also seemed to show the building. And I think the scale of this might not quite be right, of the building on there. Is that actually the right size for that building?
You know, these maps, these original baseline maps were developed back a long time ago. You remember CRT's been going on for years and years and years. And I believe these maps were probably developed in the 4.5 year time frame ago, and then we've had a lot of reiterations to it. We can go back and have the architects redo the maps, and we will do that probably when we have enough of what we're already doing. We can make one-stop shop to the architect. So
yeah, I'm less concerned with the exact details, as it just looks to me like
too
we might be
wide.
wide by a factor of 2. It might be much
it's
longer and narrower than it's shown.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's also this is one square, one rectangle. There's also a little divot in it where it's offset, so it doesn't look so flat going across the front.
Yeah, we don't want to understate it. I mean, maybe this is more of a schematic diagram as opposed to an actual, as built.
On the photo with the crane, I
Yeah.
think that crane is at one extreme.
It's on the one end, yes.
Yeah.
And the building really actually goes way, way to the left on that
Right,
photo.
okay.
It'll take me too long to.
Yeah, maybe we can get, like you say,
That's oops.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, it's to the far right. This is to the far right. And this is where it's, some of this construction's going right here.
And
Okay.
I actually think that if you move that laser pointer way to the left, even further, I think, where do you think the edge of that building is?
Well, it's not over here. So here's part of, I don't have my glasses on, Phil. The crane, okay, there's the trailer. There's the construction trailer there. So it's in this area right here.
You think?
Yeah, I
Okay.
do.
All right. I'll place a small wager later.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, actually, the reason we're doing this photo is by the next time I come, I plan to have the architect to have actually inserted, the building there. So we'll see it in its color, we'll see it in its size.
Okay. Okay, let's see, Carol and then Chris.
I've been very curious over the time and have failed to ask the really difficult questions. I hope I can get answers. How much is the CRT building costing?
Let's see, do we have any information on that, Sam, or rough estimate?
Total project cost is, there's 20 plus, there's the NRP, which is 20 plus 130 million.
And who pays for it?
We do. Your tax
Yeah.
dollar.
With the funding source?
It has multiple. The CRT and the CERC building both have multiple funding sources. The largest one for CRT is state money that provided a loan which the lab will pay back through recovery from overhead fees over a period of 30 years. But there's also some private money that's gone into it, a donation from a generous benefactor.
How many projects that Jennifer's just been talking about have private funding?
The CERC building and the CRT building have substantial private funding in them. What other? GPL is entirely Department of Energy funded, federal dollars. User test bed is entirely federally funded. That's the building that's a test for the different facades and windows and stuff. Those are federally paid.
So are you planning to get the same kind of rich donors to do the work at Richmond Field Station?
We'll see what we can do.
you should certainly I mean, since you've been so successful getting all these buildings funded, I would hope that you can get the ones in Richmond funded.
Okay.
But in the future, I think it's only fair that everybody, at least I feel, should know how much this is costing. And of course, then the next question will always be, so what has it bought us?
Okay. All right, thank you. Let's go to Chris and Paul next.
I just want to remind lab people that there are other places that you can look into the lab, and one of them is my neighborhood. And I could actually, at least at one point, I think a tree may have obscured it, see the test bed facility from my house. And I'm sure that some of my neighbors who live above me can see it. And this is not intended as a criticism. It's just that I think that a reminder that it is not just the view from downtown Berkeley that is a view that Berkeley people have of the laboratory.
Yeah, maybe we need a multi-point view shed analysis to complete the picture, so to speak, at some point. Anybody else on CAG? Okay, Lynn?
Just a simple question. On the truck trips, I assume the general contractors estimate what their traffic is. Is it monitored to see if they actually comply with those?
Oh, it's monitored.
Yeah.
It's heavily monitored. We have a construction manager that monitors it, as well as the gates monitor who, all the trucks in and all the trucks out.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, very good. Jennifer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll go to our next item here. Glenn Kubiak and Al Benitez from the lab will talk about the emergency response planning and evacuation. So please, Glenn, take it away. I'll cue up your presentation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I don't have any view graphs, but Al Benitez will. So I'm Glenn Kubiak, for those that don't know me that well yet, the Chief Operating Officer at Lawrence Berkeley. And so Al Benitez is going to give an overview of our emergency management programs, and in particular, at your request, an overview and a description of the partial lab evacuation exercise that we'll be doing in close coordination with the City of Berkeley and other jurisdictions here in July. And so I thought I would take a few minutes to set the stage a little bit for Al before he gives his presentation on protective services overall, and share with you some reflections about the experiences that I've had and some of the decisions and emphases that we're trying to put into place in this whole area of protective services. So you may recall that I've been with the lab now about 10 months or so. And when I first came to the laboratory, I was very happy to learn that the laboratory, through Paul Alvasados' leadership and encouragement, had gone out and hired really a consummate professional who it will be, I hope you're privileged to hear in a few minutes, and I'll sit down. And I found that the laboratory was making a very sincere effort to understand much better than it probably had in its history all of the elements of risk that contribute to having to fulfill our obligation, which we take very seriously, to protect our employees, to protect the public, the environment that surrounds the laboratory, our neighbors, and also to protect the property of the laboratory. And to do that protection in a way that's mindful of all of the security risks that we have, mindful of the emergency management issues that we have, and so what are some of those? I mean, obviously, as this group knows, the laboratory does a lot of work in research that involves chemicals and gases and high voltage and things like that. And so our emergency management strategy has to encompass that. But as we look at the risks, I think that one of the ones that we are most concerned about are the risks that are associated with our pretty unique geographic situation at the laboratory. Namely, we're sitting, right above the Hayward Fault, so we're in an area of some seismic risk. We're in an area where it's possible to have wildfires get started, and you've heard Gary Permonte come and speak to you a couple of times, one most recently, on the tremendous efforts that he and his team have done to manage vegetation around reducing the threat of wildfire and its impact on the laboratory. And we have a strategy around fire protection that's informed by our geographic and sort of vegetation issues. Another thing that came much to our attention, and I kind of knew this when I first came to the laboratory, but it came to the fore in January, we're in an area of substantial landslide risk. And so that's something that we've had some practice with now, because we did have a landslide that started to move in early December, and then its movement accelerated. You've heard a little bit about this. It was started just below, about 100 yards or so below the Lawrence Hall of Science, and did threaten a roadway and a building. And so we've had some practice in managing that particular set of risks and emergencies. So I wanted to just kind of set that stage. And one of the things that we are trying to do to improve our ability to really up our game in emergency management is to, acknowledging in particular the seismic and fire risks that we have, to, for the first time, I think in the lab's history, correct me if I'm wrong about that, Al, but I think the first time in the laboratory's history, we'll be doing a large, not a full scale evacuation, but a pretty large evacuation of the laboratory toward the end of the day in July. I like to say that you only play as well as you practice. And so this will be one way for us to drill with our employees ways to exit the hill in an orderly way, and to figure out how we do that, and to learn from that and extend that learning to an emergency should we have one. So with that kind of background, I wanted to introduce Al. Al Benitez came to us about a year ago, a little over a year ago, with a 33-year career in public safety and public service. Al was for many years working in the California Department of Justice as a special agent in charge in the area of investigations and intelligence for the state. His last posting with the California Department of Justice was as the assistant chief for that group, responsible for infrastructure protection and security. He also did a stint right before he came to the laboratory with the Public Utilities Commission, where he was working for about 4 or 5 years. And one notable event in Al's experiences associated with that is that Al was a part of an investigation team that looked at, investigated the San Bruno gas pipeline rupture and fire, subsequent fire. So Al clearly is a person who has multiple decades working in public safety and public service and emergency management. I wanted to just take a moment to try to embarrass Al a little bit with some of his achievements that he certainly doesn't tout on his own. He did win the Governor's Safety Award several years ago. During his time as an officer with the San Carlos Police Force, he was voted the Officer of the Year, and the most intriguing one was the Award for Heroism, the Peninsula Council of Lions Club. And I'm not sure what year that was, but without further ado, let me introduce Al Benitez to tell you a little bit about our protective services and our site evacuation.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, thank you, all of you, for inviting me to come here tonight. I wanted to give you a kind of a big picture overview of protective services, and then we'll get more focused on our emergency management preparedness and more details about the evacuation coming up in July. Protective services, thank you, is a relatively new operation at the lab. We were formed in February under this protective services banner. But it was a compilation of services that existed at the lab previously. It's not a new operation. We had fire protection, we had security, and we had emergency management at the laboratory. The components of our protective services department include the security functions, and the security functions are all of the protective functions that we have, not only to keep track of all the assets that we have at the laboratory, not only on our main Hill campus, but also all of our off-site facilities. To keep track and protect our most valuable asset, our people. We have about 4,000 folks that come to work on the Hill, and we've got people scattered in Berkeley, Emeryville, Oakland, Walnut Creek, and the area in our off-site facilities. And we also have people that work in other states and travel around the world. We keep the same protective mindset for all of them as we do for the people that we see every day. We're responsible for a large chunk of land on the hill. We have lease space off the hill. We have a number of very high value assets, research materials, computer systems, lasers, accelerators, all the nice things that we have on the hill. And we are very concerned about anyone that could misuse or get improper access to that. And so we do maintain a protective force. We've had a security force on the hill for many years. We did make a switch last year from a private security vendor that had served us well for the previous 5 years to a new partnership that we have with the University of California, Berkeley Police Department. This new partnership, which started in November of last year, allowed us to make a number of substantial improvements to our security posture. First of all was a much better integration with our operations and the campus operations. We are all UC employees, we are partners, we share land, we share the same hazards, and we wanted to share a higher level of response capability, so we went from a unarmed security force, private contractor, to having a combination of unarmed security officers and police officers that now work on our campus and patrol our campus and respond to events not only on the main site but also to our off-site facilities. This partnership did a number of things for us. One, it increased the level of supervision that we had 24/7 from a vendor-based security supervisor to a 24/7 police lieutenant and police sergeant. So we have direct and 24-hour supervision with all of that. It allowed us to consolidate our communications. So previously the lab security force was on a lab-owned radio system, and our police officers that we would call up the hill, we couldn't talk to directly. We had to meet them in a parking lot and talk through the window. Now we're all on the same radio channel, and so we can talk not only directly to the police officers that respond, but to the dispatch center who helps coordinate not only UC Berkeley Police, but if need be, any other law enforcement agency that would be coming up the hill. It allowed us to provide a higher level of integration with training so that the officers previously that would respond up the hill to our call for help would not be that familiar with our lab property. Their main job is patrolling the campus and the other UC properties. So now that they work on our campus, they get much more familiar not only with our layout and our buildings and our people, but the unique nature of a research facility on a hill on the different types of buildings and issues that we have on the hill. So we're very happy to have that partnership. It's worked very well for us. We're still in the transition stage, so we've been doing this now for about 6 months, and we've hired a number of new security officers, or UC Berkeley has, that have come up onto our campus. They did hire a number of our existing security officers that chose to apply and go through the process, so we do have a number of people that are familiar with the lab, had worked there before, and so we have a much tighter integration with law enforcement services to help us protect our laboratory. We also get involved in the security standpoint from the wildlife. We have a lot of wildlife on the hill. We're happy to have them there. We have turkeys and deers and foxes and other things. People occasionally think they see a mountain lion. And so we're happy to coexist with the wildlife that's on the hill. We recently contracted with a outside organization that is going to help us not only educate our staff on how to, shouldn't say interact because we choose that they not to, but how to deal with the animals that are on our site. We're also participating in a region-wide study where we have 15 cameras up on our site that are wildlife cameras, unattended cameras that use motion sensing to take pictures of the variety of wildlife that move through the area, in combination with cameras that are all over the East Bay Regional Parks, Tilden Park, and all being monitored to look for traffic patterns of what we call hazardous wildlife, so coyotes and mountain lions. We are part of that grand study to know what the impact of our wildlife is on the other part of the community and what we can factually say about the more hazardous wildlife that may be in the area. So we're anxious to do that. Part of that is a training component for our lab staff. And I think it's next week, we have our first, 1 week or 2 week, we have our first presentation to do that.
And what is the organization that does those presentations?
So it's the Philaday is what they go under. You might also know them as the Puma Project. They're out of Marin County, and that's what they specialize in is wildlife research and study. All right, in addition to security, we have the fire protection component of the laboratory. It's got 2 big pieces to it. The response piece, the most visible piece, our fire trucks, are what we contract with Alameda County Fire Department. They have and man our station on site. You've had a presentation last meeting, I believe, from our fire marshal that talked about fire protection. That truck is a 24/7 truck for us. It's manned, one of the only one in the county that's manned at the 4-person crew level. All the other trucks are manned with 3 on a crew. All of our crew members, 1 captain, 1 engineer, the guy that drives the truck, and 2 firefighters are all medically trained, including at least 1 that is a paramedic at all times. All of the members on our truck are all hazmat trained, a little different from many community fire departments where they have those type of services, but not all on the same truck at the same time. And our truck responds off the hill a little more than 80% of the time out into the community. So it's a resource that, while we pay for, serves a large swath of the community around us, and they do a really good job for us. The other part of that is the lab's fire protection program, how we protect ourselves. So we have 99+% of the buildings sprinklered on site. The old ones, the new ones, we do a very good job at that. Gary Permate, the fire marshal, was here last meeting talking to you about our vegetation management program. So the goal is not to get the big fire close to any of our buildings, and we've done, I think, a very good job of doing that over time and keeping the trees trimmed up and the grasses and the supplies around the buildings trimmed down. We're removing a number of the older wooden structures. All the newer structures are much more fire resistant than the older structures that we have. So in order to protect the laboratory, we have a lot of programs in place. We have obviously fire detection systems, fire suppression systems. We work very hard at maintaining all of those to make sure that they're in a full state of readiness at all time. We're a member of the Hills Emergency Forum, which is a regional cooperative organization of all the area fire departments. So we work together on fire management issues, on fire policy issues, and mitigation issues throughout the Oakland and Berkeley Hills. As you know, this year has been an extraordinarily dry winter for us, and that impacts us in 2 ways. One is the amount of water in the watershed that's available to us, and then how soon the vegetation dries out and how long it stays in that dry mode. We've already had 1 red flag warning day this month. Normally we don't see those red flag days until much later in the summer. So this has the potential to be a dangerous fire season. We've done a lot of stuff to mitigate our property and to make sure that anything that potentially could happen doesn't spread off our property, that we can address it immediately. And so it's a big concern that we watch every day, not only in the dry months, fire season, but all year long. That's what we're afraid of. The last big fire is now 22 years ago. The East Bay Hills has a major fire about every 20 years, so you hate to see that you're overdue, but the right combination of dry vegetation, low water, high humidity, winds, all those things come together with 1 spark that can be a lawnmower or something very innocuous on a regular day can really cause us some major problems. And all the fire departments in the area, including Alameda County that works with us, have been working together to have plans to send a lot of trucks to what's going to look like a small fire to begin with. And you'll notice here that you'll see trucks staying on scene for 24 hours after it looks like the fire's already done to make sure that nothing flares back up. The 91 fire was a reflare of a fire that we thought was out. And so the new protocols are that people stay on site now until we make sure that for an extended period of time, that fire really was put out. Yes?
Is it legitimate to hope that the 20 years that Al and the lab and volunteers have spent cleaning out the woods around the hills, Garland Canyon and such, could mitigate against a duplication of the 91 fire?
So the only true way to do it is make all the hills bare, and we don't want to do that, right? If you take all the fuel load away, then we can say, yeah, you're pretty not going to get a fire here, and it'll look pretty nasty the rest of the time. So our vegetation management plan, UC's vegetation management plan, is to provide the highest level protection without greatly impacting the environment that's around there, because once you take the vegetation out, now you get into erosion and you just cause other problems. So we're doing the best we can with what we have. Can we eliminate it? No. So the goal is to mitigate it to the greatest extent possible.
It's not just the efforts of the lab and the university, but where I live, but not voluntary, where I live in Oakland, where I live in Oakland, we vote ourselves a fire suppression district, and we have a parcel tax that's devoted towards city clearing of the public lands and fire department inspection and basically approval of our own homeowner behavior, which is radically different from 20 years ago. And we get a fix-it ticket that has a complete analysis of what's wrong with, what's still needs fixed on our properties. We get, if we don't do that, we get fined and stuff like that. So the collaboration that Al is talking about is actually supported by the community in a very direct way of taxing ourselves and penalizing ourselves if we don't comply. So it's pretty thorough. It's not stripped bare, but it's pretty close.
Okay. All right, on the emergency management side, emergency management for us at the lab is the preparation, mitigation of events way before anything happens, all the way through a response to any event we might have, and continuing all the way through a recovery effort. So we have the continuity of operations program and the emergency management program all bundled into one that we just call emergency management, but it has a lot of sub-pieces to that. Emergency management, the bulk of our time is spent in preparation and training. We want to make sure that our people, our employees, our affiliates, our visitors, guests, have a high level of training, that there is proper equipment for them to use individually to their level of training, and that the lab has in reserve as we need it for a variety of different circumstances, and that we train and exercise those plans and procedures so that we are prepared. We've actually gone out, we've tried it when things are still calm and relatively easy to do, knowing that when it really is going to happen, it's probably going to be in a situation where it's not sunny. It could be cold and windy, could be rainy, who knows what that particular scenario is. So we do a emergency preparedness fair every year. We have one coming up in June where we bring vendors on board, and this year we've got the shake trailer, so you can go inside and experience an earthquake and see what it actually feels like. Strangely enough, an earthquake is one of the hardest events to train for from the standpoint of getting people to realize what's happened. On our site, we did a earthquake drill, and 3 hours later we had a real earthquake, and it hit our site, and depending on which building you were in and which floor in each building you were in, you either didn't notice it or you thought the world was coming to an end. So it feels different depending on where you are, the type of structure you're in, and unlike almost all the other emergencies where you can point to something and people can see it, we rely on what people can feel for an earthquake, and that's different throughout our site. So it becomes a little more of a challenge to understand how it's reported, which buildings need to be evacuated, which buildings need to be assessed, and we have a whole number of different initiatives in there to help us do that. So we participate in a Bay Area-wide seismic warning system. So while we have sensors on our site, we're connected to sensors all over the Bay Area. And depending on where an earthquake were to hit, we can get anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds notice prior to that earthquake coming on site, and it actually can tell us the magnitude of where it struck and a general location right away of where that was. That seismic warning system does a couple of things for us before we have a chance to react as a human being. As soon as it detects, it opens all the doors on our fire bays, so we don't lock our fire trucks in if the building were to twist a little bit. All the doors go up, and we have some big water tanks on site. It closes the valves to all those water tanks, so we save all the water in there at that moment for firefighting and other uses if need be, and that's an automatic as soon as that sensor system trips. We also have one of our divisions that deals with earth sciences, has seismic sensors they've been testing in a variety of our buildings and been monitoring the earthquakes that have come rumbling through, and there's a lot of them. Most of them are at a low level, you don't feel them, but it monitors all of that vibration, and it's calibrated to each type of building that we place those sensors in. So what it will allow us to do in a bigger earthquake scenario is to quickly look at the network of those sensors, see which buildings have moved and suffered the most vibration and which ones haven't. It allows us to more quickly re-enter buildings or determine which buildings are going to need much more extensive review before we can get back in. So those systems are up in place that provide us information that we can quickly get to and help us recover from an emergency.
I'm going to assume that the gas lines are the same as the water. There's
Electron.
I'm going to assume the shutoffs for the gas lines are the same as for the water. They're going to shut off in the same fashion.
No, we do not have automatic shutoffs on the gas lines.
What is your system?
So the issue with the earthquakes are we trip our system right about the 4.5 level, depending on, again, how close to the lab it is. We can shut off the water without disrupting any lab operation. In other words, we're still on pressurized East Bay mud water that's coming in. If you do a hard shutdown on a gas line, we're going to disrupt a lot of stuff. We can't start it by ourselves. So everything shuts down, even though it's a trembler that didn't cause any damage to the laboratory. And we would have to then go and stop all lab operations, pressure down the pipes, have PG&E come out, repressure everything up. They have to shut off all the valves first, pressurize the line, and then come back and open everything up. It's a relatively big deal. The gas companies themselves have the ability to shut those lines down if they need to. It's not instant. It's not an automatic feature today on most of the lines. But if you've been following everything that's been going on since the San Bruno event, the talk is from going to manual valves, which is what we're in the San Bruno case, where somebody physically had to go out and spin a handle down, to an automated valve, which means from a control room you can send a signal and turn that valve off, to an automatic valve, which, depending on what the criteria is, will automatically shut itself down. So we rely on the gas companies to do that level of shutdown on the gas lines.
Why didn't they do it in the case of San Bruno? That's, okay, maybe Al has found out the answers.
So anytime you shut down a gas line, it's a huge deal to turn one back up. Now, you look at San Bruno and you say, well, we don't care what the huge deal was because we killed people, we burned down houses, half a neighborhood went. That debate's been going on since September of 2010 when that event occurred. If I were to turn off even a small gas line to just this neighborhood, that means before I can turn it back on, I've got to get into every single house, turn off the appliances, turn off the gas feed to everybody, restart that gas line, and then go back and reopen the valves and relight your water heater, furnace, whatever you happen to have. And so it's not as simple as you just turn it off and you go, oh, everything looks fine, and you can turn it back on. It's a big deal. And if you're a corporate customer or others, I mean, you could be out for quite a while. So we rely on the gas companies for their expertise in handling that type of shutoff. We're not prepared to deal with it at a local level.
Well, I live in the hills, and I paid to have an automatic shutoff.
In an earthquake. How come they can do it for me and not everybody else?
Well, you can certainly do it for your house because you know what's on the other side of your meter. It's a much bigger deal to do a very high-power gas line feeding, and I don't know what our gas line feeds, if it just feeds us or it feeds parts of the neighborhood that are around us, and where you would cut that off.
Well, the lab, of course, is sitting in a caldera, which is what some people call an old volcano. Apparently this weekend, up in Lakeport, 14 houses were destroyed because they are sitting in a caldera and it collapsed. What are you going to do here?
That's unfortunately beyond my scope of expertise.
It's nice to know, you should be informed about these things.
So are you saying that there's like a cavity underneath the lab that the lab is in danger of falling into?
Well, that is probably the case. I can't say it yes or no, but the water under the lab, which is apparently appearing at a greater rate than it should be in a drought, in a dry season, the water's coming up. We have that storage area for the Leonard Aquifer, and every time that subject comes up, nobody wants to talk about it. We have more water here than most cities have up here at the west. And yet no one's ever gone in to find out how deep it is and how much water, which I think is crazy. It's also water that could be used in an emergency and also for other purposes for the lab. But as far as I know, no one at the laboratory is bothered with it. We have and it feeds the north branch of Strawberry Creek, which goes under the Bevatron, and the Bevatron is the water levels coming up. For some reason, we do not have on the agenda what's going on with that situation, which involves the DTSC. But be that as it may, if you're in a vulnerable area, as we are, this caldera area starts in Sibley Park and covers, goes beyond it to the end of the lab. And it sounds very much like what happened in Lakeport. Now, these were small buildings, but they're destroyed. I don't know what would happen here, but I don't have any great faith in human beings being able to withstand any kind of disaster. I don't think all buildings can survive if there's a big earthquake and all that water is underneath. In the Loma Prieta earthquake, the greatest damage done in San Francisco outside of the marina, which was built on Bay Phillip, were the underground creeks and pipes. And I have slides of a three-story house losing its whole bottom floor and a half because it slid into the mud. You can't pretend that these things can't happen, because they do. And all sorts of other damage happened in San Francisco too. The curbs, the reason that the freeway had to have new supports, etc. So this area worries me because A, it's big and it's close to a lot of residents. It's not just an isolated place.
Okay. We have talked about the issue of the water up on the hill before. Perhaps at some point we can gather our experts again on that subject and bring some formal analysis to the table. We'll continue, though. Al, why don't you go on with your presentation?
Okay, so just a summary. This is what we're here to do. We do an integrated approach with all hazards, and the goal is obviously to be prepared for whatever may befall us. Let me tell you a little bit about our annual exercise. So that's the date, July 11th is when our annual exercise will be held. There's a lot of training and other stuff that goes on before that for our staff. It will be a partial evacuation of the laboratory, and so the scope of this exercise is up there. We're targeting about 1,800 employees between 2:30 and 4 p.m. on July 11th. Our scenario is a wildland fire scenario, which means that we have a little bit of time. We see the smoke, we see the flames, but they're not to the lab yet, so it's a planned exercise. Our goal is that we have been working on this now for the better part of almost a year now. We've been working to make sure how the lab is working with our community partners on this, and our lab staff has been working together not only to understand the issues involved with an evacuation, but specifically what types of skills we're going to be testing by doing this. This exercise will allow us to do a phased exit from the facility. We do it as a phased exit because in a real scenario, our roads are relatively narrow. We may have to plan for inbound traffic, emergency vehicles and others, as well as trying to get employees off-site at or about the same time. So we don't want to send everybody down towards the gates all at once. We want to be able to manage that flow if we have to stop it so we can bring other equipment back up the hill. Everything is planned and staged from the standpoint of preparing our people ahead of time to actually doing the evacuation, working with the local agencies and law enforcement agencies to ensure not only we monitor everything that's happening on the hill, but also the impact of traffic as we leave the hill. And so at the end of the day, we'll allow our employees to come back in. The purpose of this really is to collect metrics on what it takes, how long it takes to move X number of people down off the hill.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Al. Let's see any further questions or comments. Dean and Paul here.
Yeah, Al, I'm very curious about what your plan is when we have an earthquake and the roads are impassable and the 4,000 employees that you have on the hill have no way of getting off the hill. We're told by our disaster planning in Berkeley that we need to take care of ourselves for 72 hours. In other words, have food, water, and also that those emergency responders who probably won't even be able to get to Berkeley if they don't live in Berkeley because all the roads will be closed and all. And so what is the lab going to do if you can't evacuate your people? Are you having food storage? Are you having places where the water, if we do lose pressure from East Bay mud, how are you going to get water to buildings that have caught on fire or have basically collapsed? These are all questions that anyone that plans disasters, and I'm sure you know a lot about this, seem to forget because we as people who live in Berkeley will be impacted. In the 91 fire, I happen to live at the bottom of the hill at Claremont Canyon, and believe me, the roads were so jammed with people trying to get out of the hills that some people were killed because they couldn't get out of the hills. And so my concern is that all of this planning I like, and I appreciate what you're doing because I think it's good, but you've got to plan where you cannot reach people, where your emergency people cannot get on the hill because the roads in Berkeley won't allow them to pass. And if you don't have a plan for that, then hopefully we'll never be at that stage. But if we do, what do we do?
So in a regional disaster, a big earthquake, it won't just be the Berkeley lab who's impacted. Obviously, the entire community is going to be impacted. Our ability to get an additional fire truck, a police car, an ambulance is going to be zero because obviously the need will be just as great outside our fence as inside of our fence. We have up to 4,000 people, more or less, on our main Hill campus. We also have people in buildings that are in other cities that we have the same level of concern for. Can we stockpile enough food, supplies, medical, have all that training in all of our sites so that we can sustain people for 72 hours or longer comfortably? The answer is no. There isn't a community around here or across the country that's figured out how to do that from the nature of what you would want to do. So the hope is that we would get some number of our employees are going to be injured, just as some number of the people in the community are going to be injured. We have the ability to quickly look at our facilities through our seismic monitoring system and make a determination as to which ones we can quickly reoccupy and which ones we just can't go back in. So from a sheltering standpoint, we want to make the best use of the facilities that we already have. And if you've been seeing Jennifer's presentation for meeting after meeting, all of our construction is designed with a seismic safety in mind. All the new construction is built to withstand fairly significant earthquakes, and those are fairly large buildings that we can use for sheltering people, because again, it may not be a nice, sunny, warm summer day when it happens. We do have a health services on site, so we have a doctor and nurses that work on our site. We do train our building emergency team members at 2 different levels. One, the bulk of our people have first aid training, but that's, basic first hour, stop the bleeding, keep people calm. We do have another level of training, which the communities also have, the CERT training, which is a slightly higher level of emergency medical response that can sustain treatment for a little bit longer and help with some triage and transportation to a pickup zone. But we're not going to be able to treat people on site for other than moderate or below type injuries. Those people are going to have to be evacuated, and those evacuation resources are basically going to come from outside the Bay Area. So there's going to be a time delay for us and everybody else trying to get their people evacuated. We have water on site, and assuming that our 3 big water tanks survive that, our priority is that we protect our people. And so we do have the ability to sustain water for some period of time. If we do lose some buildings and we have to make that choice, we're going to lose some buildings, as long as we're not going to lose the people. So we'll ration the water that we have available to us, and that's what the seismic system is designed to do, is protect as much of that water instantly before it starts draining out. If we break pipes and other things, we don't want to lose water beforehand. We do store a number of supplies on site in 2 different levels. Our buildings have what are called rescue boxes, so there is a 8-hour supply basically of food, water, sanitation that are staged throughout the lab and at our off-site properties. So for a level of, I can't call it comfort, but at least the ability not to be extraordinarily uncomfortable, we have that ability for the first few hours. And again, depending on how many people come out and use those things, those boxes will get emptied rather quickly. We do have other major stashes of equipment on site, including cots and blankets and other things, if we have to stage people for a longer period of time, but we don't have 4,000 of them, and being able to set up a tent city that big to keep track of 4,000. We will make use of all the different chairs and other equipment and things that we have on the site that we can salvage the best we can, just as you would do in a community. If 5 houses got damaged severely, but one is still actually in pretty good shape, you're going to use as many things out of that house as you possibly can to serve as many people as you possibly can. We have communications that are set up region-wide, so one of the issues is how soon can you get help to us and to the surrounding community. So we have no priority over you. We're all in the same boat if we have a regional disaster. And so it's how well do you coordinate those resources coming back and forth. We may get landlocked with 1 fire truck and 4 guys. And so that will be our level of resourcing for a substantial period of time, because again, if we're impacted, the whole region's going to be impacted, and the number of trucks that can move back and forth, all of our resources are going to come from outside the Bay Area, because that's where they're undamaged and that's where the stockpile is. We'll have to wait to get them in. Where we are, we have bridges that may not be passable. We have tunnels that may not have been cleared. And so it's going to be a challenge to move that stuff in. Some stuff will come by air, but you can't move a lot of stuff by helicopter. It's a ground-based rescue, and that ground-based rescue will take maybe 72 hours, maybe longer to actually organize. We have, as neighbors, the UC campus. Unlike all of us that get to go home and have family and others, there's a whole bunch of students there whose families don't even live in the state. And so we have a concern about how we work together with the UC campus on dealing with the students who are, if they're not able to get back into their dorm, they have no place to go to, and how that would look. We have a lot of backup power on our site. So we have the ability, maybe different than neighborhoods do, to power up with electricity and run things and be able to see at night, those type of things. So while we do have while it's not a perfect scenario, we're not going to be able to shelter and keep everybody perfectly comfortable at 4,000. We have thought through all of the different steps, including how difficult it would be for us if our interior roads become impassable. Not only the exterior roads that we can't get new supplies in, but what if our interior roads, we had a landslide that potentially could impact one of our interior roads. How would we reroute traffic, and how would we move things from point A to point B just to get supplies around our 175 acres? So it's not that we ignore the big stuff. We obviously hope that we don't get into that particular situation. We know that we'll never plan to comfortably shelter 4,000, but we also know we're not going to abandon them, and that we have plans in place to take care of as many of them as we possibly can, including rescue the ones that are impacted by rubble.
Okay, very good. Paul?
If I can take off on that sort of long and short-term question. I'm sure Elizabeth and I both have the view that if the lab has to evacuate, there's a reasonable chance we'll have to evacuate as well, being essentially adjacent. We're much closer than the main Berkeley campus. This kind of coordination sounds great, but to my knowledge, we've never had any communication regarding coordinating with the lab. And you're our closest neighbor, much closer than the campus itself. In a case of earthquake, which of course is very hard to anticipate and plan for, there's a good chance Centennial Road is out. That's the most vulnerable sort of road, I think, in the Bay Area. It goes out for a lot of other reasons. And that means we may be unable to go down. Well, we may be able to go down or up. I don't know. Elizabeth's a little closer to the top. You might be able to go up.
Yeah, but the overpasses will be blocked. I just want to interrupt for a second to say that when Glenn mentioned the evacuation, I said, if you have to evacuate, the chances are extraordinarily high.
Yes.
That we'll have to evacuate. We only have 240 staff, but how about the 1,000 visitors, mostly children?
Yes, well, that was my next.
So hang on.
Yeah.
So I reached out to Glenn, Brooke Smith reached out to Al, we're best friends forever. What we're interested in doing is getting a hill plan that takes into account all of the neighbors, not just the UC branded ones, but the people in the neighborhood who will see that we also have power. So come on down with some extra blankets and water and like that, because what we really need to do is be a neighborhood that looks after one another with the assets that we have. So I just wanted to thank Glenn and Al for the fact that we've made more progress on that coordination in the last, would you say, 10 months, than we have in the last 10 years. So,
Well, I wish we
we're
were
on the right
included in
track.
it more. Well, because, I mean, well, then in a short term, so July 11th I looked up as a Thursday.
Yes.
From 2:30 to 4:30. Thursday's one of our biggest days, and we're likely to have lots of people plus staff in the garden. And I don't know if your plan includes Centennial and the Strawberry Gate, but if it does, I think we better know what you're going to do, because it could have a big effect on what's happening in the garden, which is open and not planning to evacuate.
So no, we're not using Strawberry or Grizzly Gate. In a wildfire scenario, we wouldn't want to send our people out those gates into the hills. So by the very nature of the scenario, it's a come down from the hills into the flatland type evacuation. But certainly in other types of scenarios, we would use all the available gates. We only have 3. So the 3 available gates to get people out.
So on the July 11th, you're not, it's just this fire thing, you'll go out the, what's it called?
Blackberry Gate, the bottom gate.
Another berry, the Blackberry Gate. Okay.
Yeah, so the part of the lab that'll be evacuated is in the Blackberry Canyon area, that side of the lab. And it's the 20 buildings in that zone. We have the lab broken up by zones, and they will go downhill out the Blackberry Gate. So the people that are closer to where you are up on the hill there are not impacted by either the drill, and we're not using those gates for the exit for the reason that we wouldn't send people up into the hills in a wildfire scenario.
Thanks for mentioning it. We'll definitely coordinate with you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Let's go to Rich and then Allegra.
So this is a tough nut, and I mean you can imagine more scenarios than you have answers for. And Phil and I some years ago worked on a variety of projects that looked at building security issues, and you could come up with a variety of scenarios. And it's always a question about shelter, evacuation, sort of how you do that, and you know it's a tough problem, and you never quite know. There's never a clean answer. It's not a 100% answer. It's always the 50.1 versus the 49.9. And I think this is a great idea, and the laboratory is I think the good points about the surrounding neighbors is also a good thing to keep in mind. I assume that you've worked, or there's been some coordination with the CERT, with the Berkeley folks, the city of. I mean, most of us that live in Berkeley at one point or another have there are neighborhood earthquake. So again, back to the earthquake scenario, but the earthquake planning for the neighborhoods, and I think Dean said that basically we've been told that you're sort of on your own for 72 hours. I mean that's the planning horizon. But I don't know. Have you guys talked with those guys? I mean, you know what's in their heads with regards to these kinds of disasters?
Yeah, so we work with all the surrounding cities, but Berkeley in particular, with their fire department, their emergency management, with the campus emergency management and police department. I haven't say that I personally have had that much contact with the Oakland side. Oakland calls their CERT teams something else. They didn't use the core teams in Oakland, and they're CERT in every other city for some reason. Yeah. We train our folks in CERT. It's a voluntary training thing, not only for them to be prepared to help us on site, but they all live in the community, so they're automatically community members with advanced training. Believe me, if the ground starts to shake, our employees, number one on their mind is going to be their families that live,
Sure.
work, and go to school down below. So that's going to be their concern about how do I get back there and help what I need. It also helps from a preparedness standpoint. So if you've seen for the last, since 9/11, Ready.gov and everybody else is trying to get everybody and their brother to be prepared for 72 hours. We know it's an unrealistic goal because some people just don't want to play, and yet in time of emergency, they have the same needs as everybody else who did all the planning. So the goal is that the more people we can train, the more resources we have to help those that weren't prepared. So the answer is yes. Do we work with the community, CERT teams and others for emergency planning? Is it perfect and fully integrated and ready to go today? No.
Right.
We're still working in that direction.
So just to ask sort of two specific questions. One is, I didn't see in your chart about the sort of the scenario and the planning. I assume that you're assuming some mix of people that would evacuate the hill using their own personal automobiles versus people that would use laboratory. I mean, obviously there's some fraction of the laboratory staff arrives on site via the bus system. So is that factored into your planning about having buses that sort of move people off the hill?
Yeah, so our population, some come in cars, some come up on the shuttles, some ride bicycles, and
Right.
some walk.
Right.
And so all of those, as the way they got onto site, will be tested as the way they get off a site. Now, that doesn't mean that if you walk to the campus and the fire is approaching, I'm not going to grab you and put you in a car and get you off the hill faster. But no, we will be testing both the buses and bicycles and automobiles.
Right. But it also seems to me that there's some data mining of some existing. One of the issues about getting off the hill, or any other place like that, is the flow. It's the flow and the flow rate, actually. That the number of people you've got to move, through the gate, through Blackberry. You said Blackberry is going to be your scenario here, versus, if you had something else going on, you might evacuate from Grizzly and Strawberry as well. But the question is all the years that I worked at the lab, there was staggered arrivals and staggered leaving, right? Just because, I mean, some of us worked until 6:30 or 7, some people left at 4, so there was people would arrive, so the peak flows would get spread out a little bit, but there were still peak flows. If you think about what the flow impediments are to getting people off the hill via whatever mode, it just seems to me there are some data that probably exist. If you thought about paying attention to what the bus ridership looks like, about the number of people passing through the gate, going down the hills at night, that kind of thing, you could probably get some data that would tell you something about what the flow rates. And walking may be the fastest, but it may not get you out of the hazard zone quickest.
Right. So we've collected all that data. As you know, the lab self-evacuates about 5 o'clock every day.
Right.
And so we know that everybody left on their own actually gets off the hill every day and gets back on the hill in the morning. The point of the exercise is to control that for the very purpose of controlling the flow. One is to make sure that we don't impede the road for responders that need to come up the hill, that we can stage people so that they're comfortable enough not to want to jump in their car and block a road or try to use the inbound lane as an outbound lane, that it's staged, it's comfortable, they have enough warning so that the panic isn't there, and we can flow it out so that we don't impact immediately the stop sign at the bottom of the hill where we don't get anything from there. So
Right.
that's the whole point of the exercise, isn't to get everybody off the hill as quick as we can, is to get everybody off the hill in a controlled, orderly fashion so that the flow is a continuous move as to a bottleneck just outside our fence line.
Right. So one more quick observation. So for back when I started at the laboratory, which was a few years ago, as a graduate student, this is sort of deja vu all over again. The UC Berkeley police were the on-site security at that time. And the quick story is that one of the guys that I made friends with was on the police force well, it turned out he'd been the staff sergeant for Elvis Presley when Presley was in the Army in the 50s.
Factoid. Well, all right. Allegra?
So all this planning sounds very centralized, which I think is really important, but I'm wondering the extent to which the people who work in all the buildings, the 4,000 staff members, are involved in emergency planning and knowing how to respond in these various kinds of emergencies.
So the number of people that are part of the planning team?
No,
or-
I mean, like, it sounds like you guys have this plan in place, but I'm wondering how well the staff on the ground, who are actually the ones who will be evacuated, how well they know what the plan is and how well they know how to respond and what to do.
So that's an ongoing process. Obviously, while you have 4,000 people on the lab, there's a lot of turnover every year. The number of people that come and go that are on different assignments, the students and other things that come up. The entire emergency management program is 4 people, right? So there's only 4 people that work at this full-time at the lab. So there's no way that those 4 people can do everything that needs to be done. We rely on our employees to help with that. So we have a cadre of what we call building managers. So every building has a designated building manager that has certain responsibilities for that particular building that they control. Or volunteer, right? Building manager is not volunteer, it's an assignment by a division director. Okay. Separate from that structural assignment is what we have, what we call building emergency teams. That's a volunteer. Currently, we have just over 200 names on the building emergency team roster that cover people that are in all the buildings, including our offsites. And we're always recruiting more people to do that. We believe we need about 500 building emergency team members, knowing that maybe 10% of them aren't going to be available or might be injured at that point, and that gives you about 1 person for every 10 that you're supposed to try and take care of, which is kind of a manageable level for a volunteer. A volunteer is not expected to have the same level as a professional firefighter, police responder. That's an ongoing process. We've had building emergency teams for a number of years. We've ramped up the training substantially over the last year. It's much more intensive. It's not as much a come visit us and you don't get evaluated, so now there's an evaluation component to it so that we make sure that you're actually absorbing the material that we give. So you're right, we can't do it ourselves, but we are part of a bigger we lead a bigger volunteer organization to help the lab accomplish its goals.
Okay, Dean and then Phil.
Yeah, I have one other question that comes up with your evacuation plan. What happens are you planning if the air bridge over Hearst Avenue collapses, or the dorms that are on both sides of that bridge catch on fire so you can't get people out through Hearst Avenue on Blackberry?
So there's a whole number of scenarios where we're better off staying on the lab than leaving the lab, right? We're not going to send our people out into a situation worse than where they came from. So some of that we'll be able to prevent reasonably. Some of that, if you really want to get home to your family, we're going to be hard pressed to keep you on site. We can certainly make you aware of the hazards as you go off, but some people are just going to self-evacuate despite what we're able to do. Part of that is a regional situational awareness. So before we can make the kind of decisions that say get 4,000 people off the hill, we have to know what's going on in the city around us. And that's where the partnership comes in with not only the city officials in the areas that are around the main lab and again our offsite facilities, but with the fire and law enforcement agencies also. And that's part of our enhanced communications network. So prior to November of last year, the lab had a radio system. We could all talk to each other, but that was about the extent of it. We now are partners in what's called the East Bay Regional Communications System, EBRICS, and so all of Alameda County Public Safety, so police, fire, medical, and all of Contra Costa County are on this federally funded radio network, which we're now part of. So we now have that ability to not only communicate off our site, but to understand the situational awareness off our site, because it'll tell us whether the 24 tunnels are open, what bridges are available to us, what the city of Berkeley is having impacts with their traffic, where their fires are, those type of things, and we're not going to send our employees that way. That'll be part of our planning process.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Phil?
I can directly address Allegra's question as an employee who, I represent one of the poorly trained employees as far as what to do. Every now and then there's an earthquake drill so there are loudspeakers, I think, in just about every building, certainly in my building, and every now and then instructions come on. We're simulating an earthquake. Get under your desk and, wait for, 30 seconds or whatever time period they tell you, and then at some point they say, okay, pretend the earthquake is over. Now you need to evacuate. Go to your evacuation spot. So we know what to do in an earthquake in a very limited sense, and we know where our building evacuation spot is. I know who my building, the emergency team is. That's about the extent of it. I may have received we got web training on a variety of things. I may have received some web emergency training. Maybe it would all come to me in a magical way when something happens. But I think basically most of the lab employees are about like everybody else, where we have some understanding of what to do, but we're not really trained. But personally, I feel comfortable with that. I think there's almost no scenario in which I would be on the Hill 12 hours after a disaster, much less 72. I'm going home and see how my wife and home fared, and I can walk there or bike there or something. So, and I think most people feel that way. A lot of people at the lab live in, any place is walking distance if you have the time, right? And I don't see people waiting 3 days before going home, except in a very small fraction of people.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, Carol?
One of the things that's not mentioned is that the most dangerous thing in the hills, around the lab, and in the city, fire danger, are automobiles. I've seen the automobiles catch on fire in LA and even up here in a fire, in earthquakes. They're bombs. And I don't know if anybody can do anything about it.
That's right. Fully gassed up 24-gallon tank is a significant hazard there. Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, Al, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's thank Al for coming out this evening.